Ngugi ni mutare leu tabarĩra ya taũkĩrwo nĩrĩkĩtie gũkinya hakuja leu tũnyamũ twĩ muoyo nĩũkĩte nĩ ta andũ akwe ũtaũkĩrwo makĩria ũhoro wĩgiĩ mĩrimũ therũ na ciũmbe nini itonekaga na maitho nĩcio cells and microbes na rũthiomi rwa Gĩkũyũ ũtaũkwo na njĩra nyandandũku nyitanagĩra na mũtaramu Grace Gĩbũi oro mũthenya wa Saturday agĩgũtirithia kũmenya morutani maingĩ megiĩ therũ mĩrimũ na njĩra ndikĩru kũhoro makĩria kana kĩũria wĩna kĩo no ũtwarĩrie kũhetũkĩra kũrĩa kwa Ũgĩ Media Facebook page ona kana Facebook page ya tũnyamũ twĩ muoyo ndũkahatũkwo ũkothome makĩria no taũkĩrwo kũna.
Hi guys, happy Sunday. It is now 4 p.m. on a Sunday, which I know is an unusual time for this show. Typically, we usually meet on Saturday at 4 p.m., but we had some delays yesterday, and so that is why we have rescheduled. So this show is called TAŨKIRWO show, and what we do is we talk about biological concepts in the Kikuyu language, and typically we focus on what is happening at the biological cell level and the types of things that kind of happen there, including the types of microbes that sometimes infect these cells. So this is a Kikuyu show, but to try and include more people, we also have a English show, and so that's what you're hearing now. So the Kikuyu show is typically on Thursdays at 4 p.m., and then the English / sometimes Kiswahili show is usually on Saturdays at 4 p.m. And so that is what today is. So on this channel, we are very interested in Nike na Nike, which is what and why. And so typically what happens here is we will use that framework to answer a biological concept or something that is vaguely related to biology, which is a lot of things that have to do with, human health and just how we live on this earth. And so what happens is that you guys usually give us suggestions or you give us questions that you would like us to answer. And then we make a small episode about that. So this month, actually, one thing that we're doing a little bit different is instead of focusing on one topic, what we're going to do is kind of compare and contrast two related topics. And so we think that will be very interesting and hopefully more interesting, I think, for you guys. Like, we think it's an interesting way to teach, but I'm hoping that you guys also think it's interesting as well. So that's the format that we're going to use today. And we're going to use that format to ask about Thigara na Bhangi, which is cigarettes and weed. And we're just going to compare and contrast what's happening at the biological level and what is involved in that process. And then that's going to be our lesson. And so I guess let's jump in. Let's start. So I should say that typically I'm usually not here by myself. There's usually a team of people here. Typically we have Kimaniwa, Emma, Kathike Official, and Franco Joke. That's who you've been seeing. And then more recently, you have met MC Chapo, who has also joined in. And I want to stress that this team is actually really, really important because they do a lot of work towards not only translating the content and translating the lessons, but also trying to make sure that the concepts are understandable and that they're clear. So I'm really grateful to their work, and I'm really grateful that they're here and that they're part of the team, because I think they have really, really helped push these lessons forward, and they have pushed me to learn how to teach better. So I'm really, really grateful. So anyway, that's usually who's here. That's usually the squad that's teaching you, and that's who you're going to see on Thursday. I think you're going to see Kemaniwa Emma Kathike and I think MC Chapo. I just wanted to give a shout out to this team because they've done such a big job towards trying to help this platform and to help this program and to really inspire the audience. So thank you to them and a big shout out. Okay, so now our lesson. So we're going to compare and contrast weed and cigarettes. So let's start with the active ingredient. What is the active ingredient? So in cigarettes, which is what you're seeing on your left, the active ingredient is nicotine. And then Bhangi or weed, what you're seeing on the right is THC. That's the active ingredient. There are many other things that are in these two kind of drugs, but these are the most prominent and the most active. And so that's what we're going to focus on in the lesson. Okay, so those are the two active components. Now, so what happens with nicotine is it binds to a type of receptor called the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor that's in the brain. And then what it does is it then influences the activity of those cells. So if you've been on this channel, you know that a receptor is like a little door that's on the cell. And what happens is that when something binds to it, it leads to a certain reaction, or whether it's happening inside the cell, or maybe it's leading to something being internalized inside the cell, like it leads to something. And so we're going to talk about what this whole system leads to. But I want you to kind of understand that whenever you hear someone say that a receptor has been bound, usually that means it's like a door has been opened for something else to happen. So, okay, so that door in the door that nicotine binds to is called a nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, and then the door that THC binds to is called a cannabinoid receptor. So this is in the brain, and it also influences the activity of the brain cells. So the next question is, okay, what happens next? Now these compounds have bound, what next? Okay, so the thing is, whenever nicotine binds this receptor, typically dopamine increases, and that means someone feels happy. It also stimulates the adrenal gland to make adrenaline, which helps you feel more alert. So the adrenal gland, I believe, sits right on top of the kidneys, and so it makes adrenaline, and this is like the card there says, it makes you feel more alert and awake. In contrast, or in addition, I guess this is not contrast, because also dopamine is made in the case of the cannabinoid receptors, and then you feel more happy. Our body has a system called the endocannabinoid system, which is important for helping us maintain mood, sleep, appetite, pain, feeling of pain, memory, etc. So when THC binds to these receptors that are part of this system, that can now increase or reduce some of these functions. So for example, THC can help to reduce pain or to increase appetite. It might also make you less anxious, or it might make you more nervous and hallucinate. And this kind of situation can depend on how much you consume, sometimes your age, sometimes what other drugs you have in your system, and then even how well your body breaks it down. So these are all different factors that can impact the way that your body responds to THC. Continue, and so now when you think about, okay, what happens when you consume these compounds or these drugs for a long time? So continued nicotine exposure can lead to long-term brain changes. This includes addiction or increased susceptibility to addiction to other substances. Because I think you might have heard the word gateway drug, like they say that cigarettes are a gateway drug because they do increase your likelihood of becoming now dependent on another drug. So that's one of the things that happens when you have continued exposure. The another thing is lung damage, because typically many people consume cigarettes or nicotine via cigarette, which you inhale. You inhale the smoke, and that can disrupt your lungs. On the side of THC, long-term cannabis use, cannabis is usually the major way that people kind of get this THC. One of the big long-term kind of implications of this drug is mental health. So research is still being done, but there's been some studies that suggest that it's associated with an increased risk of developing a disease like schizophrenia. And then also it can trigger or worsen psychotic symptoms of schizophrenia. This means hallucinations, paranoia, and psychosis. And it can also lead to some lung issues too, because you're smoking it and it is leading to disruption of your lungs. I should stress here that there are many people that use cannabis and THC for medicinal purposes. So, like I said, if we talked earlier about how it can increase certain things and reduce certain things. So for many people with extensive pain, it can help with pain. But there are, of course, always different side effects and always different impacts to everything that we consume, right? So you might kind of reduce your pain, but you might get some of these extra side effects. Because I think what I would like you to kind of take with you today is the fact that these two drugs, they have very specific targets in our bodies, and they lead to very specific outcomes related to our mood. And most importantly, I want you to grasp that it's not a passive process, right? It's a very active process where these drugs are present, and they actually, both of them, they reshape the brain, because your brain kind of starts to expect certain compounds, and that impacts the way that these receptors are working and even just the number of receptors. All of those details are involved in the reshaping and rewiring of the brain. So, yeah, I think I just want you to take home kind of an understanding of how these drugs work in your body, where they target, and that again that your body is a very active, vibrant place, and everything that we put in it or apply to it has a consequence and has an impact. So last week we talked about relaxers and bleaching and even the hair that people use for braiding, and we talked about how that has chemicals that sometimes leach into our bodies and can mimic hormones leading to dysregulation. We talked about that. And so then here we are talking about drugs which disrupt the ways that our cells and our brain communicates with itself. And that can have some benefits, but also some negative consequences. So yeah, that's what we are talking about today. That's our lesson. And so I think with that, I will tell you that there are some more sources, more reading that are in the comments. I urge you to take some time to read some of them and then leave some questions. If I know how to answer it, I will answer it. If I don't, I'll send you to a resource that I think answers it well. And I think with that, I will say goodbye and tell you I'll see you next week for our lesson on hepatitis and Ebola.